everyone, it's me, Crafty Witch, and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to do a book review on a fabulous book called Besom, Stang and Sword, a guide to traditional witchcraft, the Sixfold Path, and the hidden landscape. It's written by Christopher Orapello and Tara Love-Maguire. It's a really good book. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend that you go check it out. I've never read, I don't know if they've written any other books. I think this maybe it's their first book. But I definitely recommend it. If you are new to my channel, consider subscribing, hit the like button, hit the little bell icon so you know when I upload. I am very random when I upload. I don't have a set schedule. I do it as time permits, that kind of thing. So I might go days or weeks or months without uploading, and then I might throw, 5 videos up in one day. So I do what I can when I can, as much as I can. So that's just that. But anyway, back to this book. It was really, really good. I mean, it's it's not a super thick book. It's about 277, no, it's like 291 pages long kind of thing. That includes the bibliography, but I really liked it. So one of the things I liked about this book is at the end of every chapter, they included a bibliography for that particular chapter. So I thought that was really nice. And then they also have like a big bibliography at the end, as well as an index of all the different like spells or exercises that they had throughout the book and stuff like that, like finding your familiar, a daily ancestor rite, stuff like that. So I thought that was really good. Anyway, I will read to you what the chapters are. This is my bookmark, just a little tiny sticky thing. So chapter 1 talks about traditional witchcraft. Chapter 2 is Besom, Stang and Sword, so it's more about like the tools. Magic and spells is chapter 3. Chapter 4 is divination. Chapter 5 is herbalism. Chapter 6 is the black tree. Chapter 7 is the hidden landscape. Chapter 8 is necromancy. Chapter 9 is head witchery. Chapter 10 is the witch's sabbat. Chapter 11 is the lunar year. And chapter 12 is the crooked path. And then it goes into acknowledgements, bibliography, index of rituals and spells, and list or index of exercises. If you are interested in traditional witchcraft, read this book. It's really good. It's so full of so much information. It's really good. And yet at the same time, certain things, they don't go in a whole lot of depth with. And I don't know if that was done on purpose. I do know that some books and with publishers, you might have a specific word count and you can only stick within those parameters, and maybe they just couldn't go into as much detail as they wanted to. I'm not sure, but I think certain things could have been maybe more elaborated on. However, that doesn't, in my mind, take away. I think I would, if there was something in here that you thought to yourself, well, how come, they give a little blurb about it or whatever the case might be, and they don't go into a full depth explanation about it. I would use that as a motivation for you to go and do your own research, which is something that typically pagans will generally do. But anyway, so that was the list of chapters, and I just have a few notes here. So they talk about, if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at these notes. So traditional witchcraft. For myself, I've always viewed witchcraft as being part of kind of like a family. So I see like shamanism as like the grandparent, the grandmother, the elder. And from shamanism, I see witchcraft as the child of shamanism. That is your kind of like your I guess like what they said in the book, the methodology of your practice. It's not necessarily religious, but there is a spiritual tie to it. So that would come from the shamanism. And I see Wicca as kind of like the grandchild of shamanism and witchcraft, and you know, while they're all three distinct and separate forms or paths, they are also connected, but they're separate. So to me, it's like the grandparent, the child, and then the grandchild. So that's how I view it. And then in the book, they do talk about how traditional witchcraft is like an amalgamation of magic, shamanism, history, ancestor veneration, respect for the local landscape, and then like there's like this cultural diversity component that's tied into that as well. So I thought that was pretty cool. They also mentioned sovereignty, and I really like that little blurb in there that when they talk about sovereignty, they also talk about the devil. And at first I was like, oh, this is interesting. I don't have the or a devil as part of my own practice. But then in the book, they do talk about the place that the devil has within witchcraft, and how the devil is likened to the gods, you know, Pan, Hern, Hades, Cernunnos, Puck, and all that kind of stuff, and how the horned god and the devil are one and the same. So they also go in to talk about how he's also referred to as the Witch Lord or the Witch Father. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and how the devil or the horned one is not worshipped as deity. That was one thing that they did talk about in their book, was like there is no like deity worship. They see the devil or the horned one or the horned god, whatever you want to call him, as being more of a guide for you on your own magical path. And so I thought, that's different. I've worked with the horn. I view it as a deity. I view like Cernunnos and all them as gods. I don't view it as being like the Christian version of the devil. But I do know that the Christian version of the devil or Satan was, you know, they demonized, you know, the pre-Christian gods. So there is that connection there. So like I get where they're coming from. So that was kind of cool. Then they talk about animism, and how like everything has a consciousness, everything has a spirit. I was like, yeah, I totally jive with that, like that. They also talk about, like in their chapter 2, the Besom, Stang and Sword, about the tools. And then within that chapter, they also mention about token of the land. And that resonated so deeply with me, because back in 1999, when I was living here, and it was right when, after I separated from my ex-husband, my 3 children and I then moved 2 provinces away. We moved to British Columbia, and I had never lived that far from home before. And before I left, I remember, and I still have it, I had taken some of the land, some of the soil from our farm, and put it in that jar. And I took that jar with me. I still have that jar. And I didn't call it Token of the Land, but that was something that I did, and it serves the same purpose as kind of what's in this book. So I was like, oh, that touches my heart. I really enjoyed that part of the book. That really spoke to me. They also talk about they have, you know, the Trinity of altars. So they have their altar genus loci. I think I'm saying that right. And then they have their sacrificial altar, and then they also have their ancestral altar and stuff like that. So they talk about that in the book. They also talk about like laying the witch's compass, which is not the same as casting a circle. It's kind of different. So I shouldn't say it's kind of, it is different. So they talk about that in there. They also talk about trance states, like theta, delta, alpha, all that kind of stuff. And I was really surprised that actually in their bibliography, because one of the first witches I've read that's ever talked about that kind of stuff, oh my gosh, that was Laurie Cabot. And, you know, she does talk about witchcraft as a science. And I think there was some part in here where it says it's not a science. I think I personally would just disagree with that. I do think that there is a science to it. And I know Laurie Cabot really talked about that. And I was really surprised that she wasn't in any of the, like she wasn't mentioned in the bibliographies at all. Because she did talk about, you know, entering into those, like, kind of those states. I think with hers, it was it alpha, theta? I can't remember. Anyway, but I know she did talk about it. So I was like, oh, this is cool. So they talked about the different trance states. They also talked about the witch's hexagram. To know, to will, to dare, to grow, to be silent, and then to go. So it's different than the ones that were kind of, they added some extra stuff to that. So that was kind of cool. And what else? I'm just flipping over my notes. Oh, they talk about the seasonal, can't talk today, seasonal shifting, how they see it as there being basically two seasons, summer and winter. And they talk about the Queen of Heaven and Hell. She's also called the Witch Queen. She's a guide. She's not worshipped as a deity, kind of like the Horned One. So that was different. I do connect with deity, and deity is part of my practice for myself. But traditional witchcraft, like, I mean, you could be, I guess, atheist, you could be Christian, you could be Jewish, you could be whatever, and still practice witchcraft, because it's like a method of doing things, right? It's like a lifestyle, what have you. And there isn't like that actual like worship of a supreme being, if you will. I don't connect with that because I've grown up acknowledging and you know, recognizing deity, you know, whether it's in the form of Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun, all that kind of stuff. Just recognizing the polarity, which can also be limiting too, because where does that leave, you know, as humans, we tend to personify deity into a likeness that we can comprehend. And if you are maybe non-binary or something like that, where does that leave you? You know, what, you know, I can see maybe somebody who wasn't non-binary having easier time to connect with deity in that aspect, because they can identify with either being male or female or something like that. But if your gender doesn't, then where does that leave you? What does that leave you to connect with? So those were just some thoughts that I was having as I was reading the book. So like, I totally get where they're coming from when they're talking about like not worshiping deity, and it the two that they did mention, the two beings that they mentioned, the Witch Queen and the Witch Father, as being more as guides. You're not going to worship them, but you can work with them, kind of thing. They also talk about the hidden landscape. I really like that. Spirits of your local area and the local lore of your area, which I think is so cool. They talk about where they're from. So they're from like New Jersey or whatever. They included the Jersey Devil into the book, and I thought that was really cool. They're also the New Jersey Devils is one of my favorite hockey teams. So I was like, yay, go Devils, go. But anyway, that and the Calgary Flames. I love the Calgary Flames. Of course, I'm Canadian, so I got to incorporate hockey into a talk about a witch book here. But, you know, anyway, bringing it back, I really like that they included that, including the local lore. And I think in addition to that, to include the local indigenous lore of your area. And it's going to be different depending on where you live. And if you happen to live in a community and maybe it's predominantly, I don't know, Caucasian or something like that, maybe it's has a strong German feel to it, maybe you think to yourself that there is no indigenous lore to that area, but guaranteed, if you are from North America, South America, Central America, indigenous people have lived from one tip of the continent to the other, kind of thing. So there is indigenous lore, regardless if you live in a town where there are no minorities or no indigenous people living there, no Native Americans or no Native Canadians. There would be lore still associated with that area that would be indigenous prior to Europeans coming over. So I would recommend finding out what that is, so that if you do encounter those entities, those spirits that were here since time immemorial, at least then you would know maybe the proper protocols on how to either work with them or what they prefer as offerings. I know they talk about offerings in this book. They mention like glass beads and things like that. But certain entities require or prefer certain things. For instance, working with a pakak, which can be found all over North America, they like raw meat. They also like certain types of berries, like the choke cherries and things like that. So if you're going to try to reach out to one of those entities, you might want to, and there's a certain way that they accept the meat. You have to hang it up in a tree. So, and it's not just like a little piece of meat. Like, so if you hunt or something and say you kill a deer, then you would take some of that meat and you like a nice chunk of it, like a good old steak size, and you would hang it in the tree with a little bit of tobacco and stuff. So there's certain protocols for certain entities or certain spirits that are in North America and elsewhere. And even if you're not part of that culture, they may be present wherever it is you plan on working. So it would be, you know, wise of you to maybe find out what those entities are, what those spirits are, and if there's any protocols with regards to leaving them offerings. They may not appreciate you dumping alcohol out as an offering. They may not appreciate things like glass beads because maybe they don't want any animals to try to eat that thinking it's food, or, you know, whatever the case might be. They might prefer raw meat. They might prefer a certain type of berry like the choke cherries or what have you. So I thought that was neat how they included that in there. I think that's really important, and I would encourage you to include that within your practice if you so feel that is something that may be important to you. They also talk about necromancy, and I really liked that whole part in the book about necromancy. That was actually one of my favorite parts in the book. I work with ancestors and with the dead a lot. It's a big part of my practice. So I really like how they broke it down in the book. So they talk about the ancestors, they talk about the mighty dead, the beloved dead, the honored dead, the forgotten dead, the dishonored dead, the untimely dead, the nameless dead, and the hidden company. And I was like, that is like so awesome. I really, really, really like that part of the book as well. Then they move on into hedge retreat. So they talk about trance, and then they give some recipes for tea and for some smoking blends. And then they talk about soul flight. They also briefly mention shape-shifting. I disagree with some of the stuff that they have in there with regards to shape-shifting. A lot of people, and I've talked about shape-shifting on my channel before, a lot of people that haven't grown up or been exposed to maybe certain cultures where shape-shifting is very real and where physical transformation can actually happen, will view shape-shifting as only being able to happen on like a spirit plane or the astral plane and that kind of stuff, and that, you know, there's just no possible way for it to physically happen. Whereas there are plenty of cultures, especially in North America, South America, Central America, plenty of indigenous cultures that strongly believe in the actual physical ability for people to shapeshift into physical form of whatever it is that they're shapeshifting into. It's strongly believed, it's respected, it's not seen as just shapeshifting on the astral plane. It's seen as physically being able to do those things, and there are people that can do those things. There's people that are naturally, I guess, born with that, what we would consider a gift to be able to do that. And then there's people that don't have that natural ability to do that, and there's certain rituals, certain magic, certain ceremonies that can be done that would assist them to be able to make that shift, but they're not a natural shapeshifter by birth. They are one that uses certain methods to acquire that ability to do that sort of thing. It is very real. A lot of people don't believe in that, and that's fine. People within the indigenous communities throughout North and South and Central America, we know it's real. So they do talk about it, but then they're like, it doesn't happen on the physical. Yeah, it does. You're just not with the right crowd. Not that you're not with the right crowd. You just weren't in with folks or a culture or a belief system where it is practiced even to this day, and it still happens, and it's very much real. But they do, you know, I didn't agree with how they wrote it in there, but I did agree with the fact that, yeah, you can do it on the astral level, absolutely. And I'm glad that they did include it in there, because shape-shifting can be found all around the world in various cultures and various practices, and there's various ways you can incorporate that into your own practice if that is something you so choose to do. So they talk about that. Then they go on to talk about familiar spirits and how they're not, it's not to say, I live currently with 3 cats and a dog, and I would never say that, you know, they're my familiars, because they're not. They explain what a familiar is. I do believe I have had one familiar in my life so far, and she actually passed away about 5 years ago. She was my cat. Loved her dearly, but there was, when I was doing any kind of magical working, she was always present, and she assisted me literally within those workings. The cats I have now, they're pets. They're not, a familiar and a pet are not the same thing. And I'm glad that they made that distinction in the book. And so they talk about like going about, if you don't have one, how you could possibly go about getting one. And then they talk about the witch's Sabbath, the history and the elements of the Sabbath, and like how like that was the historical part of it, and then like Sabbath and like modern day witchcraft. They talk about how they don't follow like the typical wheel of the year with the 8 festivals, which is that's their practice. They on page 240 they talk how they have or they feel they have little or no personal significance, like how that has no personal significance to their lives, like especially like with the harvest aspects of it, and that it's not part of their practice. They're pretty far removed from that, and they made a comment in there saying that they're not farmers. I come from a small rural community where farming and the harvests and those times of years, and even in the spring with the planting of the crops, it's very strong. Farming in this area, that's our main industry, and that's our it's so important that even when our town has a parade, you see all the tractors and combines at the end of the parade rolling down the main street kind of thing. That's like how deeply connected our community is to farming, and everybody knows like once harvest season comes along, like we have different events, and we'll have our like our harvest wrap up and stuff like that. During harvest season, the men are out in the fields, they're combining, they're trying to bring in their crops. The wives, the women are in the homes, they're making big suppers, they're hauling the suppers out to the fields to feed all the farmers and the workers that are working. It's a big thing, and we're surrounded by that. It affects our community, with events and all kinds of things. And then at the end of the harvest, in November, they typically have like this big, it's almost like a rodeo slash harvest celebration for the whole entire community. It's a big thing here. So it's like, I didn't jive with that part of the book where they talked about like how far removed they are. That's their experience, and I totally respect that. For myself, though, it's still very much a part of our lives here, and it does affect us. And so I still have those other harvest festivals and things like that, or like even in the spring when they start planting crops. And there's kids that get pulled out of school, like high school kids get pulled out of school if they're, from farming families in the spring and in the fall to help with seeding and then to help with harvesting. Like it affects us, and we're not so far removed. We don't live in some big city like Vancouver or anything like that, or New York City, where we're really so far removed from our food chain. We're still really connected to that. So for me, I still honor those Sabbaths, those part of that wheel of the year, because I see it play out where I'm from, and I'm part of that process. So for some people that live in more urban areas, big cities, and they're not part of that process, it may feel really irrelevant to them. Not saying that they don't respect that is happening, but maybe it doesn't resonate with them at all, and they just can't mentally connect to it, or whatever, or spiritually connect with it. So they talk about that in there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It didn't resonate with me, but I respect it, and I thought it was interesting. For myself, it does. It is part of my life. So, yeah, so there's that. And then they talk about Hexenknot and Halloween. And of course, that's obviously there's a German influence in there. I've kind of noticed that in the book anyway, which is cool because like half German myself, or part German. My dad was. And then they also go into talk about the lunar year, and then not including like the generic names. Like we see it on Facebook in memes all the time, you know, the cold moon, the strawberry moon, and, you know, all this, all kind of like the indigenous names that have been applied to those moon phases. But it's like so generic that it doesn't even connect with your region. So when they talk about, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something, let's say strawberry moon or something, for one region that might be in July, for another region that might be in August, kind of thing. So they lay out, they give their own names for their particular practice. And I like that. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. In there, I noticed they mentioned April as the garden moon. And where I live, our winter is still going strong in April for the most part. We still have ice and snow, usually between March and May. You never know what kind of weather you're going to get where I live. I live out in the middle of the prairies, so like the Midwest, and we can still get like 20 below. Usually it's warming up, and usually things will start to melt. You are nowhere near being able to even plant anything though. Like there's still snow, there's still ice. And just depending on how the winter is that year, it's usually, you know, it's not nice enough to even start a garden. And it's too early to start planting seeds indoors, where I am anyway. But I thought, well, that's kind of cool. So that will probably be something I'll be doing starting in January. Is kind of given names to each of the full moons, and for my area that's relevant for what's happening in my area. And I'm going to incorporate that as part of my practice. And it's totally different than what they have in the book. But I really liked it because it gave me the inspiration to do that. I never thought to really do that before. So I thought that was cool. And then they talk about the crooked path and what it is and that kind of thing. So that's my book review on Besom, Stang and Sword, A Guide to Traditional Witchcraft, and the Sixfold Path in the Hidden Landscape. I didn't even touch on the Sixfold Path, but that's in this book. They explain what that is. There's all kinds of exercises, and they talk, like here, like I said before, I think, at the end of every chapter, they include a suggested reading list. So I really like that part, and I really liked their extensive bibliography at the end. There's some things in here that didn't connect with me, and that's totally cool, and that's totally fine. And there's some things in here that I absolutely, totally adored and really, really enjoyed. So if you are wanting to learn about traditional North American witchcraft, I'd highly recommend reading this book. Take what you can from it, and what doesn't resonate with you, you can leave behind. It's all good. You can still learn quite a bit from this book, and maybe it might help to fuel some inspiration for you to go and create maybe your own path or your own practice that really connects you to the local landscape for where you're from, and helps get you going on the wonderful ways of witchcraft. So that's my book review for this book. Fabulous book. Really enjoyed it.